You know that feeling when the silence in your life gets so loud, it drowns out everything else? That's how it felt every single day for me. My name's Jennifer, I'm 36, and I live in the suburbs of Seattle. A place where the grass is always neatly trimmed, the neighbors smile politely but never dig too deep, and the days blend into each other like some old faded photograph. I've been married to Michael for 10 years. He's fine. He's a good man, reliable, hardworking, everything you're supposed to want in a husband. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other. And I don't mean literally. I mean, I could be standing right in front of him, waving my arms like a madwoman, and he'd still only notice if I asked him if he wanted dinner. Michael works long hours in a corporate office downtown. Most nights, he gets home, loosens his tie, and collapses onto the couch with ESPN or some mindless true crime show. The man loves his routines. But me? I hate them. I didn't always. There was a time when I thought a quiet, predictable life was exactly what I wanted. Now it feels like I'm suffocating in my own house. The crack started showing a few years ago. I'd catch myself staring at the clock in the kitchen, willing it to move faster, just so the day would end. Or standing in front of the mirror, running my fingers through my hair, wondering if I'd turned invisible. Michael never said anything. He never noticed when I'd wear a new dress or when I'd spend an extra 10 minutes curling my hair before he got home. But the scariest part wasn't him not seeing me. It was me not seeing myself anymore. It wasn't until last month that I started realizing how far I drifted. I was scrolling through Instagram, mindlessly liking photos of old high school friends who seemed to have it all together, trips to Italy, romantic anniversary dinners, kids who looked like Gap models, and I felt this sharp pang in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, but something close. Like I was watching a life I should have had but never got the chance to live. That was the day I told myself I needed a change. I didn't know what it would look like, but I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. So, I signed up for a gym membership. It seemed harmless enough, right? A little cardio, maybe some yoga, just something to get me out of the house and moving. Plus, I figured it would be nice to have something to talk about at dinner besides the grocery list. Michael didn't even blink when I told him. "That's nice," he said absently, his eyes glued to his phone. That first week, I felt like a complete idiot. The gym was packed with people who all seemed to know what they were doing. Fit moms in matching Lululemon sets, guys with arms the size of my thighs, and 20-somethings who treated treadmills like a social event. And then there was me, fumbling with the settings on the elliptical, trying not to fall on my face. But it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt something. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was a spark. A tiny flicker of life in a world that had felt dull for far too long. And that's when I saw him. He was across the gym, spotting some guy on the bench press. Tall, broad shoulders, a beard that was just on the edge of scruffy, and a laugh that carried over the clanking of weights. He had this energy about him, like he didn't take himself too seriously. I couldn't help but watch him out of the corner of my eye as I pretended to adjust my shoelaces. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the one where I first noticed James, was the beginning of everything. It started with an article. You know the kind you click on late at night when you're too restless to sleep but too drained to do anything productive. I don't even remember the title, something like 5 Ways to Rekindle Passion in Your Life. It was probably written for women like me, who've quietly resigned themselves to lives that feel more like routines than anything resembling passion. One sentence jumped out at me. Sometimes, all it takes to rediscover yourself is to let your curiosity pull you toward something or someone new. I read it twice, then a third time. Something about it stuck with me, like a pebble in my shoe I couldn't shake. What would it feel like to let curiosity take the wheel for once? To stop doing what was expected of me and do what I wanted, even if I didn't fully understand what that was yet. The next day, I went to the gym. This time, I wasn't just there to go through the motions. For the first time, I noticed the people around me. Really noticed them. There was a woman on the treadmill in front of me, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she ran at what looked like an impossible speed. Her energy was magnetic, her confidence almost radiant. I wondered what it must feel like to move through the world like that. To my left, a guy was doing pull-ups like it was the easiest thing in the world. His arms bulged with effort, but his face was calm, almost serene. He didn't glance at anyone, didn't need an audience. He was fully in the moment, his own moment. And then there was James. I'd seen him a few times before, but never let myself really look. Now I couldn't stop. He wasn't just attractive, though, let's be honest, he absolutely was. It was the way he carried himself. Confident but not cocky, with an easy smile that seemed to put everyone around him at ease. He was chatting with a group near the free weights, making them laugh as he casually balanced a dumbbell in one hand. He looked so alive, like he wasn't weighed down by the invisible chains I carried every day. It wasn't about wanting him. Not yet, anyway. It was about wanting to feel like that.
Free. Light. Seen.
I spent the rest of my workout sneaking glances at him. I told myself it was harmless, just curiosity, just a flicker of something I hadn't felt in so long that I barely recognized it. But as I left the gym that day, my heart still racing from the treadmill, or maybe from something else, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd read in that article. Let your curiosity pull you toward something new. That night, I sat across from Michael at the dinner table, picking at a plate of baked salmon and overcooked green beans. He was scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging me. "How was the gym?" he asked without looking up. "Fine," I said, my voice neutral. But it wasn't fine. It was the opposite of fine. For the first time in years, I felt a spark. A tiny, fragile spark that made me wonder what else might still be out there, waiting for me to notice it. And deep down, I knew I wouldn't be able to let it go. It happened on a Thursday evening. I remember because Thursdays were the one day Michael stayed late at work for some team meeting. Not that it mattered much. He'd come home just as tired, just as distracted. I'd finished my usual routine at the gym, wiped down the elliptical, and headed toward the water fountain. That's when I heard his voice for the first time. "Elliptical warrior, huh?" I turned, startled. It was him, James. He was leaning casually against the fountain, a water bottle in one hand and a smile on his face. His teeth were impossibly white, and there was a playful glint in his brown eyes, like he already knew his comment would fluster me. "Excuse me?" I said, feeling my face flush. "I've seen you on that thing," he said, nodding toward the row of ellipticals. "You've got the focus of a Navy SEAL." I laughed nervously, clutching my towel like it might save me. "Yeah, well, I guess it's easier than trying to figure out all those machines with cables and pulleys. I'd probably end up breaking something." "Don't let them intimidate you," he said, taking a sip from his water bottle. "Most of them are just glorified coat racks anyway." There it was again, that easy charm, that confidence that felt so effortless. He wasn't just making conversation, he was engaging. Like I was the most interesting person in the room. "I'm James, by the way," he said, holding out his hand. "Jennifer," I replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, warm, and lingered just a second longer than it needed to. "You're new here, right?" he asked, his head tilting slightly as he studied me. "Yeah," I admitted. "I've only been coming for a couple of weeks. Trying to change things up." "That's good," he said, nodding approvingly. "Change is good. Keeps life interesting." It was such a simple statement, but the way he said it like he truly believed it made something inside me stir. When was the last time I'd thought about keeping life interesting? For the next few minutes, we chatted about workouts, the gym, and Seattle's never-ending rain. It wasn't anything deep or profound, but it felt like breathing fresh air after being stuck in a stuffy room for years. And then he said something that caught me completely off guard. "By the way, you've got great form," he said, nodding toward the ellipticals. "Most people just flail around like they're trying to escape a swarm of bees, but you actually look like you know what you're doing." I blinked, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't just a compliment, it was the way he said it, like he'd noticed me. Really noticed me. Well, I try, I said, laughing softly. You're doing more than trying, he replied, his voice warm and sincere. Trust me. I don't know why, but his words lingered with me long after our conversation ended. As I drove home, I replayed them in my mind, feeling a mix of confusion and something else I couldn't quite name. When I walked through the door, Michael was exactly where I expected him to be. On the couch, scrolling through his phone with a half-empty beer on the coffee table. How is the gym? He asked without looking up. Good, I said, slipping off my sneakers. But it wasn't just good. It was more than good. For the first time in what felt like forever, I'd felt seen. Not as a wife, or a neighbor, or just another face in the crowd, but as Jennifer.
I didn't tell Michael about James.
It wasn't like there was anything to tell. It was just a conversation. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Michael snored softly beside me, I realized that James had awakened something in me. A spark. A reminder that maybe, just maybe, there was still more to me than I'd allowed myself to believe. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep with a faint smile on my lips. It started with small things, just little moments that made the monotony of my days feel less heavy. Every time I saw James at the gym, he'd find a reason to talk to me. A quick joke as I struggled to adjust the resistance on the elliptical. A playful quip when I accidentally dropped my water bottle. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years, and every conversation felt like a secret, stolen moment that was ours alone. Soon, it became more than just quick chats. One evening, after a particularly grueling workout, I was about to leave when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Hey, Jennifer, James said, his smile as easy as ever. You look like you've earned a reward for surviving leg day. How about a coffee? My treat. I hesitated. The gym was one thing, it felt safe, neutral. But coffee? That was something else entirely. It felt like a step in a direction I wasn't sure I was ready to take. I don't know, I said, gripping the strap of my gym bag like a lifeline. It's getting late. Come on, he coaxed, his voice light but insistent. It's just coffee. There's a little place down the street, great lattes, terrible pastries. What do you say? I looked into his eyes, and for a moment, I felt the walls I'd built around myself start to crack. It was just coffee, right? Harmless. Okay, I heard myself say, my voice softer than I intended. The cafe was small and cozy, the kind of place where the smell of freshly brewed coffee clings to the air like a warm embrace. We sat at a corner table, away from the other patrons, and talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his job as a landscape architect, how he loved working outdoors and hated sitting at a desk. I told him about my volunteer work at the library, and how books had always been my escape. You know, he said, leaning forward slightly, you've got this light about you. Like you're carrying something you don't let the world see. But it's there. I see it.
I didn't know what to say.
His words hit me in a place I hadn't realized was still tender. For so long, I'd felt invisible. But James?
He saw me.
The coffee outings became a regular thing. Once a week turned into twice, and soon we weren't just talking about surface-level stuff. We were sharing things, real things. He told me about his divorce, how his ex-wife had fallen out of love with him while he was too busy chasing deadlines to notice. I told him about Michael, about the way our marriage felt less like a partnership and more like two people just going through the motions. Does he make you happy? James asked me one evening, his voice low and careful, like he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. I don't know, I admitted, stirring the foam on my latte with a spoon. He used to. But now, I feel like I'm just existing. Like I'm a part of the furniture, something he barely notices anymore. James nodded, his eyes full of an understanding that made me feel both comforted and exposed. You deserve more than that, Jennifer. You deserve to feel alive. It was the way he said it, like he meant every word. That made something shift inside me. I knew he was right, but hearing it out loud felt dangerous, like lighting a match in a room filled with gasoline. Our connection deepened with every conversation, every shared laugh, every lingering glance that lasted just a second too long. I started looking forward to our coffee dates more than anything else in my week. The gym became an excuse, a stepping stone to the real reason I was there. I told myself it was harmless. We were just friends. But deep down, I knew better. The way he looked at me, the way his hand would brush mine when he passed me a napkin, the way my heart raced every time he said my name, it was anything but harmless. At home, things with Michael felt even more strained. He didn't notice when I came home later than usual. He didn't ask where I'd been or why I seemed lighter, different. Part of me hated him for it. Another part was relieved. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I hadn't thought about Michael all day. Not once. My thoughts had been consumed by James, his laugh, his words, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world. And that terrified me. But it also thrilled me in a way I couldn't ignore. It was a Friday evening when James invited me to dinner. Not coffee, not a quick chat after a workout, dinner. At first, I hesitated. Coffee felt innocent enough, but dinner? That was something else. Something more deliberate, more intimate. But when he looked at me with that quiet confidence, like he knew I wanted to say yes even before I did, I found myself nodding. Just dinner, I told myself as I got ready that night, standing in front of my closet for what felt like an eternity. My hands hovered over a simple navy dress that I hadn't worn in years. Michael had bought it for me on one of our anniversaries. I wondered if he'd even notice if I wore it tonight. Probably not. James had picked a little cafe in downtown Seattle, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. It was one of those places with dim lighting, candles on every table, and soft jazz playing in the background. The kind of place that felt like it belonged to a world far removed from my own. When I walked in, he was already there, waiting by the door. He smiled when he saw me, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. "You look amazing," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "Thank you," I murmured, feeling my cheeks flush. We were seated at a corner table near a window, and as the evening unfolded, everything felt effortless. The conversation flowed, punctuated by laughter that felt too loud for such a small space, but too genuine to suppress. James told me stories about his work, his travels, his dreams, and for once, I didn't feel the need to filter my own thoughts. By the time the waiter cleared our plates, I felt light, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't realized was there, and for the first time in years, someone had helped me set it down. But the moment I'll never forget came when we stepped outside. The cool night air brushed against my skin as we walked along the quiet street, the sounds of the city humming in the background. James slowed his pace, his hands tucked casually in his pockets, and I could feel his eyes on me even before he spoke. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said, his voice softer now. "Me too," I admitted, though my heart was pounding in my chest. We stopped walking, standing there on the empty sidewalk under the glow of a street lamp. For a moment, neither of us said anything, the silence between us charged with something unspoken. And then he leaned in. It was gentle at first, hesitant, like he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. When his lips brushed against mine, it was like a spark igniting something deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and when it ended, he pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine. "Jennifer," he whispered, my name sounding like a promise on his lips. But I couldn't say anything. My thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, excitement, guilt, longing, and a deep, aching fear of what this meant. "I should go," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, stepping back, though the look in his eyes told me he didn't want the evening to end any more than I did. "Good night, Jennifer," he said, his voice low and steady. I managed a faint smile before turning away, walking back to my car with my heart still racing. The drive home felt endless. My mind replayed the kiss over and over, my fingers gripping the steering wheel as guilt began to creep in, thick and suffocating. When I walked through the door, Michael was in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV. He barely looked up as I slipped off my shoes. "Hey," he said casually, his eyes still on the screen. "Hey," I replied, my voice strained. I went straight to the bathroom, shutting the door behind me as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my lipstick slightly smudged, and all I could think was, what have I done? The guilt hit me like a wave, crashing down with a force I wasn't prepared for. I felt like two different people, one who craved the connection James had awakened in me, and another who couldn't shake the image of Michael sitting there, oblivious to the truth of what I'd just done. I climbed into bed that night, the space between Michael and me feeling wider than ever. His breathing slowed as he drifted off to sleep, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to silence the voice in my head. "You've crossed the line, Jennifer." But as much as I hated myself for it, I couldn't deny the other truth simmering beneath the guilt. I wanted to do it again. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope, balancing precariously between two worlds. On one side was my life with Michael, a life of quiet predictability, routines that played out like clockwork, and conversations that barely skimmed the surface. On the other was James, with his easy laughter, his piercing gaze, and the way he made me feel alive. It started small. A text here and there, little jokes or questions that didn't feel like much on their own. But those messages became the highlight of my day. I'd find myself glancing at my phone every few minutes, heart racing when his name lit up the screen. "You're smiling at your phone a lot lately," Michael said one night over dinner, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Oh, just something funny from one of the library volunteers," I lied, my stomach nodding. He didn't press further, returning his attention to his plate like it was the most interesting thing in the world. That was the thing about Michael. He didn't ask questions anymore. He didn't notice the way I'd started dressing up a little more, or the way I seemed to linger at the gym longer than before. Part of me wanted him to notice, to care, to see me, but another part was relieved he didn't. My gym time became my escape. James and I started meeting outside of the cafe, finding pockets of time to steal away from the rest of the world. Sometimes it was a walk through Pike Place Market, where we'd weave through the crowds and laugh at the street performers. Other times it was sitting in his car, talking for hours about things I hadn't shared with anyone, not even myself. "I feel like I've been asleep for years," I admitted one evening as we sat parked by Lake Union, the water shimmering under the moonlight. James turned to me, his expression soft but serious. "And now?" I looked at him, my chest tightening. "Now, I feel awake, but it's terrifying." He reached for my hand, his touch warm and grounding. "You don't have to be scared, Jennifer. You deserve to feel alive." His words stayed with me, replaying in my mind as I went about my days. But the more time I spent with him, the more I felt the distance between Michael and me growing. At home, everything felt off-kilter. Michael and I moved around each other like strangers, polite but distant. I started noticing the small things that I'd ignored for years. The way he never looked up from his phone when I spoke, the way he barely acknowledged me when he came home. "Do you want to watch a movie tonight?" I asked one evening, trying to bridge the gap. "Can't," he replied without looking up. "Got a work call in an hour." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and retreated to the bedroom. I told myself it wasn't his fault. He wasn't cruel or unkind. He was just absent. And maybe I'd been absent too. But when I lay in bed at night, it wasn't Michael I thought about. It was James, his smile, his voice, the way he made me feel like I mattered. I hated myself for it, for the way my mind kept wandering to him even when Michael was right there beside me. One evening, as I was folding laundry, Michael walked into the room. "You've seemed distracted lately," he said, his brow furrowed. I froze, my hands gripping the shirt I was folding. "Distracted?" I echoed, forcing a laugh. "I'm just tired, that's all." He nodded, accepting my answer without question, and left the room. But his words lingered, gnawing at the edges of my guilt. The truth was I was distracted by the texts, the secret meetings, the memory of James's touch. I was living a life Michael didn't know existed, and the weight of it was becoming harder to carry. Every time I saw James, the cracks in my marriage seemed to grow deeper. I'd tell myself it wasn't fair to Michael, that I needed to end whatever this was before it went too far. But then James would smile at me, say something that made my heart skip, and all my resolve would crumble. It wasn't just about the excitement or the way he made me feel wanted. It was about the connection, the way he listened, the way he saw me in a way Michael hadn't in years. But with every stolen moment, the guilt pressed heavier on my chest. I was living two lives, and I knew it couldn't last forever. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Michael finally said something. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The rain was tapping gently against the windows, a typical Seattle drizzle that made everything feel slower, heavier. Michael was scrolling through his phone, as usual, while I pushed scrambled eggs around my plate, unable to eat. And then, out of nowhere, he set his phone down. "Jennifer," he said, his voice calm but firmer than usual. "Can we talk?" I froze, my fork hovering midair. "About what?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew where this was going. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his blue eyes meeting mine for what felt like the first time in months. "I don't know. You've seemed distant lately. Like something's bothering you." My stomach twisted. I forced a smile, one that I hoped didn't look as fragile as it felt.
I'm fine, Michael.
"Just a lot on my mind." "Is it work?" he pressed. "The library? Is something wrong?" "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "It's nothing like that. I promise." He studied me for a moment, his brow furrowing like he was trying to read something in my face. "You tell me if something was wrong, right?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. "I would," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't push further, didn't pry. He just picked up his coffee mug, took a long sip, and returned to his phone. But the moment didn't end for me. I sat there, staring at him as the guilt inside me grew, like a storm cloud. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to spill everything about James, about the dinners, about the kiss that had shifted the ground beneath my feet. I wanted to say that I still cared about him, that I hadn't planned for any of this to happen, but that I couldn't ignore how far apart we'd drifted. But I didn't, because saying it out loud would make it real. And I wasn't ready for that. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I cleaned the house, folded laundry, ran errands, going through the motions like a ghost in my own life. Michael didn't mention our conversation again, but I could feel him watching me more closely, his quiet concern lingering like a shadow. That night, as we lay in bed, the silence between us felt unbearable. He turned to me at one point, his hand reaching out to brush against mine, and for a fleeting moment, I thought he might say something. But he didn't. Instead, he rolled onto his side, his breathing evening out as he fell asleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I couldn't go back to the life we'd built, to the version of myself I'd been before James. But the thought of tearing it all apart, of admitting the truth and destroying the foundation we'd spent a decade building, it felt impossible. I thought about James, about the way he made me feel like I was the center of the universe. But I also thought about Michael, about the way he used to make me feel that same way once, a lifetime ago. Somewhere along the line, we'd lost each other. I didn't know if we could ever find our way back. The next morning, as Michael got ready for work, I lingered in the kitchen, clutching my coffee mug like it might give me answers. "Have a good day," he said as he grabbed his briefcase, pausing in the doorway. You too, I replied, my voice catching in my throat. He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine. I love you, Jennifer, he said quietly. My chest tightened, the words hitting me like a punch. I love you too, I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. As the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a shaky breath, tears spilling over before I could stop them. I didn't know what the future held, whether I'd find the courage to tell him the truth, or whether I'd keep living this double life, torn between guilt and desire. But one thing was certain, I couldn't keep walking this line forever. Something would have to give. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same.